Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this morning's webinar. So I'm Marie Cheng, and I'm the Partnerships Manager here at My HR Toolkit. I'd like to welcome you to the webinar this morning. If you haven't joined us before, we have been doing a series of different webinars, probably since the beginning of lockdown, so I'm coming up to about a year now, which have all been quite popular in terms of different types of topics. But today we thought we'd do something a little bit different. So we put together a bit of a panel Q&A webinar to answer some of your burning questions on how best to prepare your workforce for going back to work in the new normal. So hopefully everyone is having a bit of a think about that. So on this morning's expert panel of guests, I am joined by Tracey Hudson, a director from the HR department, an employment lawyer, Jodie Hill from Thrive Law, and Toby Pochron from Freeths. So welcome to you all, and I'll let them say hello in a second. So as I said, today's webinar is going to be a little bit different. We're going to be having a bit of a discussion on various different topics, so workplace safety, vaccinations, that type of thing, how best to manage changes in the workforce, but also the future of work. And what we'll be doing is covering some of the questions as we go along, and we're hoping for this to be really interactive, so please do feel free to add any questions in the box as we go along, and at the end we'll also have a chance to ask any other follow-up questions. So a couple of housekeeping things before we get started. Again, if you've joined us before, you'll be familiar with the setup of the Zoom. There's a Q&A box at the bottom. If we could ask you to put any of your questions in there, just because the chat can get quite busy and some of the questions get missed. So please do feel free to add your questions as you go along. Zoom chat, as you would have already seen, Camille has put in something in there, but so if there's any interaction type questions there, we'd ask you to get involved that way. And also we'll be doing a few polls, which we will just earmark as we go along, so please do also get involved in those. So without further ado, let's get started. Welcome obviously to our panel, and first up we are going to be looking at workplace safety. So if we get the next slide up, Camille. Okay, so workplace safety. So probably a lot of things on people's minds at the moment is on vaccinations, testing, and also how secure your workplace is with respect to COVID. What we will do just before we launch into the questions is we're going to just do a little bit of a poll. So if we can grab the poll up. We'll be there in a second. Okay, so the first poll, just to get a bit of a gauge as to like how everyone's feeling on this. So on the whole, do your staff feel safe about being in or returning to the physical workforce? So workplace rather. So we'll give it a couple of seconds to do that before we get to our first question. Cool, a few more. And great, okay, just a couple more seconds there. Right, that's quite interesting. So obviously in general everyone can, I think if we can share the results of the poll. In general, I think most people are feeling quite safe. Again, we'll explore some of those sort of topics there. So what we will do is, if I launch the first question around workplace safety, and as I said, if you do ask any questions in the Q&A box, that would be great. So if we start perhaps with Toby, had a question. What are your thoughts on what companies and businesses should be doing to demonstrate to their employees that the workplace is COVID safe? That's reflected in the poll.
Great question. Right, I first did one of my first Q&As about 10 years ago, and it was John Curtis who always told me to start every answer with, "Oh, great question." And that was a great question. So thanks very much for that one. Yeah, I mean we've been getting loads of this. So my practice generally, so I'm an employment lawyer as well. My practice generally is helping employers, like I am almost exclusively. And the steps that I've seen that's been best, you start off. You gotta assess your approach to risk. So the employer's looking at, what is my industry? What are the specific guidelines that I've got that are in place already that are specific to what I'm going to be doing? I'm going to have to assess the risk on those, and then that at the top of it trickles down into the remainder of what I'm going to be doing. And I always think that the key aspect and the most important thing that any employer can do is communicate with their workforce. You know, if you have solid communication channels, solid consultation channels, policies, procedures, records, you know, means of getting that across to employees, they're just going to feel more secure. So then we always have this, you know, the position is going to be, look, do we need to have PPE in place in our workplace? You know, are we going to still enforce social distancing? Are we going to have a testing policy? Are we going to have a vaccination policy? What are we going to do about managing different shifts, the way, the patterns, the way that people work? Are we going to keep records of who comes onto our site? You know, how are we going to manage, you know, any other incidents or accidents? How are we going to do that with the communication? If you have those already set out as policy and procedure, it acts as this big warm blanket for everybody. You know, it's just a way in which that employer can ensure that everyone knows what's going to happen. Everyone knows what's going to happen in any specific instance. You know, everyone knows that they've got their voice as well. You know, the ability for an employee to come to their employer and say, look, I'm not feeling quite safe. You know, that poll was brilliant. You know, having someone say, you know, I feel quite safe about it. Say, well, you know, the ability to say, well, why do you feel quite safe? Why don't you feel completely safe? What can we do to get you towards feeling safe? That's just brilliant. You know, what you don't want to have is employees who are, you know, anxious and worried, don't tell you, and so therefore either feel awful about it, feel as if they're not telling the company line because they're feeling worried about telling you about things, or even worse, suffering some sort of poor mental health and then going off on sick. You know, that's not what employers want. There's a moral and a social obligation towards that, to ensuring that people's mental health is protected. But then the latter part of that is also there's a commercial decision there to be taken. You know, we want people in work to feel safe so that they are effective and productive and can work for us. So I think circling back, I guess the answer to that question for me, yeah, definite first port of call is always going to be communication, working out risk, putting a policy in place, and then consulting on it. By consulting, I simply mean seeking views with a way to reaching an agreement about what those steps are going to be. And that is it's just so powerful. I mean, you're obliged to do it under health and safety law anyway, but it is just so powerful for employers to take that step.
Great. Tracey, Jodie, I don't know whether you wanted to add any comments on that or.
I mean, yeah, I massively echo the communication piece. I think it's often overlooked how important the communication is when it's things about returning to work and safety, because I always find that we're all in the same storm, but we're in a different boat. And so people are very much on a, you know, in a different journey, a different place. And whilst you might have one team in the same office with the same role, they might all feel very differently. So it's really, really important to have that clear communication around returning to work, and also consider things like reasonable adjustments as well. So if someone does have a disability or a mental health condition that might also be a disability, just thinking how you might make specific adjustments for that particular role, where you might not for everybody else. So yeah, I think it's so important, and so many employers get it wrong because they kind of miss that step and they go to the end result. And actually it's really thinking about how can you support your staff back, and making sure that they feel okay, and how do they communicate, especially when you've got a hybrid workplace where you may have some people working from home and some people in the office, making sure the communication is still consistent between those different groups as well, especially if they're using flexible furlough still.
Yeah, just to add to that, I'd say for managers, they need to try not to be judgmental when they're having these conversations, because, you know, with quite a lot of companies that we're talking to, you've got managers or owners of businesses who have been working in the workplace throughout the pandemic. They've had staff on furlough. They're really used to it and kind of hardened to it now. So when they've got people who, you know, they have this perception, or they've been off for the last year, now they need to get back to work, actually that can be really scary for a lot of people. You know, we've been told over the last year, stay at home, the world is a dangerous place, we're all going to die. Oh, but now it's okay to come back to work. Okay, see you Monday. It's quite a difficult thing for people to get their heads around. So just that tip for managers is just really try not to be judgmental about what people are thinking, because that will encourage employees to talk to you more.
I think there's quite a lot of overwhelm as well. I know from experience, you know, dealing with clients, there's some people that are thinking, you know, I've done all my networking on a Zoom call and now I have to go into a room full of people. There's that feeling of overwhelm that there's a lot happening at once. You know, I'm going out for dinner, I can do all these things. And whilst it's a really positive thing for people to engage in. It's also quite overwhelming because we've been so used to our little lives at home. The other thing I'd say is about self-care. So I think a lot of people have got into a really good routine of self-care at home. And so again, encouraging that when they go back to work, if, you know, say they now have an hour's commute, are they still practicing that self-care, or are they actually forfeiting that for the commute now? So think about things like that as well, because actually supporting people with their mental health during this transition will pay dividends in the long run.
It's also unique as well. I mean, I had a client recently, they put in place a face mask policy, and one of the big pushback they got was a few of the chaps had grown gigantic bushy beards. And so the face masks, when they were being put on, just weren't being effective. And so the first port of call from that manager was just like, well, you've got to shave your face, mate. And then that just, you know, that just immediately devolves. And it's, you know, this offhand comment that really then has caused them, you know, significant undermining of their employee relations, because it was just simply, well, you've got to shave then. You think, no, that's not how it works. And it's that we won't have ever seen that before. And it's just about adapting to those really unique scenarios. Just take a step back for a second before you react to it, and then see if you can get over those arguments. And, you know, there's always an employment law. It's always going to come to an end where one thing has to happen in a set way, but it should never just be that dictated. You know, it can never just be a dictum from an employer. It should always be that means of communication and opening those flexible channels.
Okay, great. So we've had a couple of questions as well, because I guess the other aspect, if we talk about vaccinations, and so quite a number of people have asked about this. So obviously you've got a situation whereby we're all doing vaccinations at different stages, and we're all starting to think about going back into work. What are your thoughts around managing, I guess, firstly, employees who refuse to be vaccinated, but then also managing that kind of atmosphere in an office where you might have people who don't want a vaccination or haven't had it yet, and those who are like really quite concerned and have some anxiety over the fact that they're going into the office but not everyone's vaccinated? Like how would you suggest that we think about that in the workplace?
Yeah, sorry, is that I'll pick that one up if that's okay. I'll chip in initially. Yes, I mean, because vaccinations, they're not mandatory. You know, you can't mandate that your employees have a vaccination currently. My view with them is that as long as you have other preventative measures put in place, then any staff member who comes to you and says, I'm concerned that other members of staff are not getting vaccinated, you say, well, the other aspects of this are that vaccination is only one part of our plan here. It's only one part of our procedure as a way to avoid the implications of this virus. So having everything else put in place, all the social distancing measures, proper cleaning measures, routines, you know, structuring shift pattern changes, that type of thing, having that on top of having the vaccine is also beneficial for everybody. Because you can never understand why other people wouldn't want to have the vaccine, but we don't want to judge them either for not wanting to have it. So if they've got an anti-vax idea in their head, then that should be adhered with, and we should put other systems around them to keep not only them safe, but everyone else in the workplace safe as well.
Jodie, Tracey, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I think the other thing that's come up from our perspective is that some people actually can't be vaccinated for, you know, either religious or pregnancy reasons, for example, or disability reasons. Very small minority, but again, just being mindful that there may be genuine reasons why people can't be, and so respecting that, and also they may be covered by the discrimination legislation in the Equality Act. So, you know, having that, like, as Toby said, that kind of open communication about what else you're doing is really important, because it's about managing expectations, isn't it? You know, ultimately everyone's feeling a bit anxious and some people have really strong views. So again, backing that up with a really clear policy so that people have that to go back to, along with the consultation meetings around how it's going to develop, whether it's under review, where you go if you are feeling that it's not being adhered to, that type of thing, that can help then, you know, ease some of these other concerns because you're doing stuff in other areas.
Yeah, I think to add to that as well, you know, people are getting vaccinated and then they've got this kind of sense of protection, which means that naturally they're going to not be wearing their face masks. They might sanitize their hands less. And that is could make people nervous who haven't yet been vaccinated. You know, not everybody, some of us are a bit too young, you know, some of us aren't eligible for the vaccination yet we're going back into the workplace now. So it's really the job of managers and business owners here to be leading by example and making sure that you don't let those COVID protocols that you've put into place over the last few months slip, just because, you know, some of the older people in your workforce have had their vaccinations and now have had their second. The younger people, they haven't had that opportunity yet. So they're still thinking we've got to do all this properly, whereas people who have been vaccinated are obviously feeling a little bit more relaxed. There's also a bit of kind of an education piece in terms of this ignorance here from everybody, because we don't actually know yet if it reduces transmissibility. We don't actually know. So everyone's making the assumption, oh, I've had the vaccination, therefore I'm immune now, I can't get COVID, I'm fine and I can't spread it. We don't actually know that. So just reminding people who have been vaccinated, if they're upset about people who haven't, for whatever reason, as Jodie said, pregnancy, they might have a disability, they can't have it, they might just be anti-vax, it might be a religious reason, it might just be that they don't trust it, whatever the reason is, there's loads. You know, just being mindful and reminding people that have been vaccinated, it doesn't mean that we're completely safe just because you've had your vaccination. You could still get it. Yes, hopefully you might not be as unwell, but you can also transmit it because we don't know yet. So just being mindful of that, I think, is important.
Okay, moving a little bit away from perhaps the workplace, because we had an interesting question actually from Karen. The question here is around staff concerns aren't necessarily about just the physical workplace that they're going into, but actually it's about the travel there. So for instance, if you're like, you know, down in a city or whatever, you're having a lot of public transport going in, what would you say like is the best way to respond to those kind of concerns? Jodie, do you want to start on that?
Yeah, I can do. So I think it goes back to what Toby and I was saying before around communication. You know, ultimately, if you're consulting with staff about their return to work, this should be something that comes up in that consultation. Now, it depends on what their reason is, and you know, ultimately, if they've got, I mean, we've seen quite a few cases where people are particularly anxious about getting public transport because they have anxiety, for example, or they've got agoraphobia. So there are some situations where, you know, you would be obligated to make reasonable adjustments, but really it's about understanding, well, can they do their job from home still? Is there a flexible way that you can work around it? You know, even if someone doesn't have a disability, I think it's really important to validate those concerns and not judge people because you don't feel that way, and actually understand why do they feel that way, and is there a way that you can work with them, rather than just saying, oh well, everybody has to come into work, I don't care if you don't have a car, you know. So really think about how you're communicating with people and try to be flexible, because ultimately it's only for a short period of time and people will ease back in, but that initial anxiety is going to be very real for a lot of people.
And actually sometimes it's important to have those conversations in a bit more detail. I'm just thinking about a conversation I had with an employee of a client of ours a couple of weeks ago, and they were somebody who just in reality didn't want to come back into the office. And she gets a train and a bus into work and said, no, I'm absolutely not going on public transport. No way, I'm not doing it. The general public are really dirty, I'm not doing it. And she was absolutely adamant, but in talking to her, you know, she's going into town on a bus on a weekend to go shopping. She's going into the city centre on a train with her kids to take them to go and see her sister. She's doing lots of things in her personal life on public transport. The actual thing was she just didn't want to come back into work because it suited her working from home. So if you have those deeper conversations, you can get down to actually what the real issue is. And the real issue for her wasn't the health and safety of being on public transport. It was the hour and 15-minute commute that she had both ways, that she thought, you know what, I don't want this anymore. I like my work-life balance. I want to be at home for that time. That's 2 hours a day. In lockdown, we've been at home all the time. You don't want to waste 2 hours in a 24-hour day traveling. Totally understandable.
Yeah, it really focuses employers' minds on what needs to happen in the workplace as well. I mean, we've had so many of those conversations. People are like, well, we need them in. You're like, well, why? What physical part of their job role needs to be performed? As you do a lot of retail work, so that kind of makes sense. You know, they have to physically actually be there. But a lot of them, you say, well, you know, they need to be in to do this accounting practice. You know, well, that's grand then. You know, all we'll do, we'll amend their start and finish time so that they travel earlier in the morning. If they want, obviously, if they want to consultation earlier in the morning, so there's less people on public transport. They can do the part of the role they need to do, and then they can go home. and, are they going to miss those rush hour times? And it's exactly as Tracey and Jodie have said, it's just about listening to people and working out whether or not there is a genuine fear, or whether or not someone has just that motive of, I just want to work from home. That's kind of, even that as a principle is fine. Someone really just doesn't want to come into the office and they still do the job role, great. But if we can still get productivity from them and they'll still be happy and they still won't pose us any further issue, great news. It's just the best outcome for everybody.
That's really helpful, because actually that leads us very nicely to our next topic. Sorry, we're just trying to keep an eye. We'll come back to some of these questions in a second. So it's a lot about, obviously, this managing like the changes in the environment, so the effects on like mental health, or like how people feel about leaving lockdown, or people who've been on furlough perhaps for quite a long time. And to your point there about business productivity and what employees are thinking of, like in terms of like, are they at home working, that type of thing. So if we perhaps move on to the next topic, and we'll start again with a bit of a poll just to get a bit of a lay of the land. So if Camille's my poll launcher, if you can launch the poll, please, that'd be great. So question for everyone is, how ready do you or your employees feel about going back to a normal work environment post-COVID?
Keep trying to answer these, but it says I can't.
Yeah, I don't think
I
tried
did
to do
the
it the
same
other day
thing.
as well. You can add your view when you answer. Just give it a couple more minutes. Okay, I think I forget the numbers aren't quite correct because it's got us on them. Okay. Right, Camille, do you want to share the results? Okay, so unsurprisingly, based on probably some of the questions and probably some of the conversations we had earlier, it's quite mixed feelings in terms of people. There's obviously a small percentage that are desperate to go back to the office, and obviously some that aren't feeling quite ready yet, but the majority probably sit in that little middle area. So perhaps we can go to a question, and Jodie, if I could ask you to maybe have a bit of what your thoughts around, so as a starter for 10, how do you think the workplaces have changed due to the pandemic in terms of like some of those topics that we're talking about, mental health and
yeah, I think they've changed in a couple of ways. In relation to mental health, I think it's something that we're talking more about. It's something I've been campaigning for years, but it's been unfortunate that it's taken a pandemic to bring it to the top of the agenda. But I do think that employers are really thinking about how their employees feel and how they can support them with well-being, mental health, and just generally how they structure the workplace. And we talked before about employees working from home or working more flexibly, different hours, and that for me is where the future of the workplace is going to go, and the changes that we're really seeing come into play on a more permanent basis. So when I set Thrive Up, we worked smart. We worked from home, when you want, where you want, how you want, as long as you got your work done. And everyone thought we were a bit mad doing that, but actually that's kind of where people are going now. I feel like the employers that say it's going to be 9 till 5, you've got to come back to the office, I just don't feel there's a place for that anymore. I feel like if you're really listening to what your staff want and need, and actually looking at your productivity and the profitability of the company, both of those things are, if you're looking at both of those things, you are going to need to consider different ways of working, and managing mental health. Actually, that fits really, really nicely alongside it, because actually, if we work in a way that, say, for example, I like to work mostly from home because I have anxiety, I have ADHD, and I actually find that, having a quiet space for me really works. But there are days when I need to be with people and I need to buddy up on certain tasks. So I communicate that really effectively with my team, but opening up those conversations about, well, how do we work best? What support do you need? I think it's actually allowing us to explore different ways of working, but also how we can support people in very unique ways. And actually, a lot of it doesn't cost very much. It doesn't, it's just really about listening and understanding, and just really taking some of the lessons from what has been a pretty awful nearly over a year now, from what has been an awful time, taking some of those lessons and really learning from them as businesses and as employers, and then bringing that forward. Because actually what we need now is a resilient workforce, don't we? Everyone's taking a bit of a battering, so we do really need to show that support moving forward, and actually innovate in the way that we run our businesses, and don't just default back to the way that we were before.
I think that's brilliant, Jodie, and I hope that more people do what you've just done, which is probably something that you just do in your day-to-day because you're confident about this, but a lot of people would be so nervous in a public forum to say, oh, I have anxiety and ADHD, so this is this is what works for me. People are so scared of talking about mental health, and it is great that it's at the top of the agenda now, but it is a real problem, and it still is a real problem, and people are still so worried about talking to their managers or you know, directors about how they can work better and how they've struggled during lockdown, because they're just so worried about being judged. Oh, well, if I tell them that I'm a bit stressed, I think I can't do my job, you know, and it just makes the anxiety worse. So I appreciate you saying that, Jodie, because I hope that sets an example for everyone else, because, you know, we all struggle at different times, and it's good to not be judgmental about it, because, you know, we have a much better workforce, much better employee, much better team working if we're all just a little bit more open and a little bit more honest about how we're feeling and what we're struggling with.
I do think as well that on your point about being open as leaders, I think we have to lead by example as employers. You know, if we expect our staff to be open with us, and if we expect you know, them to work in a certain way, then we need to be open and honest with them as well. It goes both ways. You can't just dictate to people that you want them to do something because they're not going to feel as though the culture's there. So, you know, it is putting yourself in a place of vulnerability, and you may not have a mental health problem, and that's, you know, so you don't have that to talk about, but equally just saying, you know, I'm feeling really stressed. It's about being open about how we feel, and the fact that we're all human and we all have bad days, and some of us have more bad days than others, but it's about being honest about that, and showing people that actually, even at the top, you know, people are struggling, and it still means you can be successful, and you can, you know, you can progress within the organization by being open and honest about it. So that's something that I've seen a lot more businesses do, where leaders are actually standing up and going, do you know what, this is my story, or this is how it's affected me, or they've done like a blog about the impact of lockdown, just really trying to have a bit more of a human approach. Because I think, you know, we've been in Zoom calls, we're in people's houses, we've seen a bit more of a human side to a lot of our staff anyway. So I think it's an opportunity to build on that, really.
Yeah, I mean, we've been seeing one of the best ones, recent policies that we put in place is what we call like a business productivity policy. And one of our clients then consulted with everybody and just said, well, no, we don't really need to know why you need to work in a set way. We just want to know how you work best. And they said, you know, it's better for us if we know what you need from us to be able to do your job role effectively. And I think they sort of twisted it around to kind of be that what we want from everyone is this commercial kind of aspect to it, and then they just structured it around that. So some people, you know, they stop work at 2:30 to go and get their kids, and then they pick work back up again at 7:30. Some people say, you know, I work much better in the mornings and work much better in the evenings. And the business, you know, this sounds callous. They still work, and they didn't care. They just said, we don't really want to know that aspect of it. All we want to know is how we can best support you. We don't need to know the reasons for it. I quite like that aspect of it. That doesn't work for everybody, because you also want to know and have those conversations with people about how you can support staff and what you need to put in place around them and the reasons that they need that aspect of it. But I think, yeah, just having that ability, I think, you know, Jodie hit it on the head there. I don't ever understand why businesses would ever want you to work just 9 to just 5. It doesn't compute to have that reason behind it. No, you need to be work because we need to see you working. You know, no, you don't. You need to see the productivity. You need to see the outcome. You don't need to see someone sat at their desk slaving away. It just doesn't. Yeah, I think completely right. I just don't see how workplaces are going to be like that in the future. It just doesn't make commercial sense.
So very nice to lead into a couple of the questions. I think it's as though Toby has scripted this. We had a couple of questions around productivity and measures, actually, and 9 to 5 has cropped up. So maybe I will read the question. So an anonymous person has put in a question here about, despite all the good things I'm hearing here, I guess at their workplace, their executives are of the mindset, and this is not uncommon, that because we don't have metrics in place to measure productivity working from home, they've asked them to go back to the office 9 to 5 despite the best year ever last year, and obviously as a result of that they're likely to lose some staff. So guess it's not a question, but maybe to reinforce or others to come in on that point. And then another one around productivity was there aren't existing metrics in place to measure productivity, but find that there's been a bit of a reduction in collaboration and innovation because obviously some of those types of things are sometimes better in person. How can they make it clear that treading water and getting things done isn't necessarily being like very productive? So again, thrown out. Tracey, you were going to say something before I interrupted you.
Oh, I've forgotten about that. That was like 2 questions ago. But on this point, the simple solution here is get some metrics. If you need to measure it. It doesn't matter if you haven't got any data to now, but how are you going to measure things going forward? So in some businesses, that's obviously really easy to do. You know, how many units are we producing or whatever it might be. In more kind of service businesses like ours, for example, you know, we measure how happy our clients are. If we've got happy clients, it doesn't matter to me when my team work, where they work from, how they work. If the clients are happy, we're delivering, that's all that matters. So I would encourage your executives to really have a think about, you know, what does a good business look like? Is it financial? You know, is it that we're not making enough money? It doesn't matter, but how are you going to rank productivity? Because Toby's absolutely right. It's not about just watching somebody sit at their desk sweating because you're staring at them and glaring at them and work harder, get the whip out. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, you know, it's a really good point. In fact, I heard that there was an employer that had cameras in employees' houses watching them work from home because they didn't trust them. And I was like, where does that stop? I mean, there's certainly like privacy breaches there. So there's obviously there's that element of trust, but going back to the collaboration and innovation point, I think that's a really, really good point that's come up time and time again. And we've dealt with that is as part of like when Toby was saying, you know, asking people how do they work best, that came out of our research was we work best together when we're doing X, Y, and Z, and we work best on our own at these times doing X, Y, and Z. So that allowed us to then structure the future of, say, for Thrive particularly, is that all of us are home working, but we can come in when we want. But then we have certain things where it's to do with collaboration, innovation, or team meetings where we'll try and get together. And if 1 or 2 people can't join, they can join on a screen. But the idea being that we have still some face-to-face contact, and you still get the, you know, that collaboration that you do miss actually. If, you know, trying to do a Zoom call with loads of people and, you know, getting people to talk, and it can be very, very difficult. So it is about finding a balance of what works best. I think, you know, I saw something about working everyone should go to 4 days a week, but that's still 9 till 5. And I'm like, it's still the same problem, but just over 4 days. I think the point here is about flexibility and listening to people. When do they work best? How do your team work best? And what is the best output from them in those circumstances, rather than having any rigid approach or any, you know, structure of you have to be in 1 day a week or whatever. It's about really understanding you know, how that might work for your business as well, because like Toby said, for some businesses, you know, if you're in retail, you have to be in the shop. So, you know, it's really about understanding the organization and the individuals when it comes to that kind of you know, future of working, I'd say.
Yeah,
You know, there are people.
Sorry, Tracey, cut you off there. Sorry, you carry on.
Oh, okay. There are people who actually love the 9 to 5. They love the structure. They don't want to have to, do a 9 till 12. Oh, then I'll pick the kids up. Then I'll work in the evenings. They want that, you know, they need those work boundaries and do want to be back in the office, want to be doing the 9 to 5, want to be coming home, stick to that strict, you know, kind of rigid routine. So for those companies out there who want those 9 to 5, there are people there. There are people in the workplace who are looking for jobs right now who want the 9 to 5. So if that's the way that your workplace is, that's the way you want it to be. It's not going to work for everybody, but there are people that you can attract to your business who want that structure.
I think it's so important for a business to define value as well, because not every aspect of what an individual does is going to produce profit. You know, other things are designed for, you know, innovation, collaboration, developing things, research, chasing bills, you know, doing things that aren't potentially actually generating revenue in and of themselves, but they carry our value. I think there is always that temptation to be like, oh, what are you doing? You know, how are you progressing? What's actually happening here? But sometimes you just need the space to be able to think about things for a bit. And you thinking time doesn't carry its own particular value, but it's so incredibly important. I think, yeah, you know, having something like a business productivity plan, how you define what things are, how you define what the business actually does value, is really just significant in a way in which you can support people, and how they then best work. So someone might be really, you know, innovative in the mornings. You know, it might not always happen like that. Someone might wake up and think, oh, it's great, I've got this great idea, and I'll write that down. You know, structuring them in and making them travel and making them sit at a desk and do certain things at a certain time. It's completely counterintuitive. They should be telling you how they work best.
There's a whole thing about the fact that your best ideas come to you in the shower.
Yeah,
my best ideas come to me in the shower.
Yeah, that's so true.
There's quite a few questions around hybrid working, which we'll touch on in the next section, but I just wanted to go back perhaps around a couple of questions on a bit more, as I said, like mental health kind of related. Had one around, okay, so I guess what you were saying before, obviously some people have had a bit of an immediate effect with the effects of lockdown and obviously everything that's been going on, but in a lot of cases, like with a lot of trauma cases, sometimes the effect can be quite delayed. So you're kind of like getting on with it because we've been getting on with it for about a year, but as people are going back, you might get a bit of a delayed response from people who perhaps they thought they were coping quite well. What advice would you do around a bit of like a delayed trauma response to like lockdown and go back to work?
Yeah, I think it does go back to the communication point. If people know who to speak to, what support there'll be, you know, how they do that, whether they're working from home or in the office, that's first of all very, very important. One of the things that we found really, really effective is we do what we call wellbeing risk assessments. So these assessments are basically there to assess the well-being, but it looks at sleep, food, stress, musculoskeletal, everything. And so what it does is it allows us to collate data on so for example, we do it when they come back to work and then a couple of months later, and we can start to understand where we need to invest time and money into different areas where for example, the impact is on the well-being. So it might be that people are feeling particularly overwhelmed. It'll come out within the report that you get, but it essentially just tells you 3-4 areas that you really need to work on. And we found that that's a really great way to do it, because you're not sitting down one-to-one with an individual going, tell me how are you coping? It's done through technology. And we found that anonymity has really helped us to get some really good data to really get into the depths of what's actually wrong, or if there are any problems, you know, where should we spend our money on, you know, how should we develop the team, where should we invest in the team. So that's something that we found really useful. Loads of our clients do the same thing, but obviously that needs to be alongside the open communication and the fact that they need to know exactly where to go if they feel that they are struggling, so that they're not waiting for that assessment to come or they're waiting for a one-to-one. And obviously making sure that you're doing regular one-to-ones, having regular meetings with staff where you actually ask how they are. I mean, the amount of times that we say, how are you? I'm fine. And then we just automatically do it because we're English, British, you know, it's just the thing, isn't it? We go, sometimes actually in emails, we go, I hope you're well. And we don't even say, how are you? So I think we need to get into the habit of going, how are you feeling? And there's a really great an app that's free that we've been using called the Form Score. And it basically allows you to create a little group. And when you log in, you can basically score yourself out of 10. And so you start to get a feel. So if you can see one of your colleagues has scored themselves a 2, you can check in on them. So it's a really nice way of improving the communication. There's another one called Loopin, which you can add on. We use Slack. So we've added that onto Slack. So when we log into our platform where we do all of our comms, it asks us, how do you feel? And then you can start to rate it, like what's contributing to that? Is it the weather? Is it work? Is it what you've eaten? I don't know. It could be lots of different things. But the point being, again, it's that data-driven approach and actually opening up the conversation about how we feel, so that if someone has a decline in their mental health or is feeling stressed, they tell you as soon as possible. What you don't want is for people to wait until they're literally at burnout or breakdown, because at that point it's very, very hard to come back. I had a breakdown 3 years ago, and I'll tell you what, it's the hardest thing to come back from. So I speak from experience, and having that open culture is so, so important, and those really clear methods of communication on how you can get help early on. So if you've got a wellbeing policy, or you know, you've got access to mental health support or anything like that, mental health first aiders, all of that stuff, make sure people know how to access it.
There's some funding at the moment, which I found out about yesterday. I was on a webinar with Warwickshire County Council's webinar, but apparently all the county councils across the country are doing it, where they've got 100% grant funding that businesses, it's SME businesses, can spend on anything to improve mental well-being. So creating a nice outdoor space, or having like a relaxing space within your office environment. You can spend money on like bean bags and sensory lights and whatever it might be, nice rugs and a coffee table, like having a zone that people can go and chill out if they're getting stressed. So there is a lot of support out there, and financial support if you want to make changes to your workplace so that people feel a little bit more comfortable and you know, so you're more approachable. One of the things that I got off this webinar and jumped on a Teams call with my team yesterday and talked to them about this funding. And one of the things you can spend money on is kind of team building stuff to encourage people to come back into the office. Because of course we've got, you know, we've been off for over a year, people have left, new starters have joined, new starters are coming back into an office with people they've worked with for like 6 months that they've never even met. So you can spend this money on doing team building activities to get to know each other. So there is a lot of support out there if you want to look at stuff like that.
Again, you have read, it's like everything is scripted. We have some questions around how you go back into the workplace. So what we are going to do is just move on to the final topic, because there's quite a lot of questions around hybrid working in the future of work. So obviously we've been talking about it quite a lot. So this is around remote working, hybrid working, how you balance your business with like employee needs. So again, if I if I go to my poll launcher, Camille, if you could launch the poll before we get started. Okay, so the question here is, will you be offering staff hybrid working options in the future? It'd be nice to have a supplementary question of like, how has that changed since lockdown? But anyway. Still going. Okay. Camille, if you'd like to share the results. So again, probably unsurprisingly, yes, quite a lot of people are looking to offer hybrid working options. And again, a lot of the questions have related to this. So Tracey, I know this is kind of like your area quite a lot. I'm just trying to have a scan of which questions are best, but actually perhaps we'll just start with like, in terms of the biggest challenge around organizations around hybrid working. We touched around the team morale and team spirit, and like people obviously starting and going back. How best would you say to someone like getting people back in?
Getting people back into work, okay. So I mean, as we've said already, communication is the key thing really, and talking to people about how they feel about coming back in. When we're talking about businesses switching to hybrid options moving forwards, I think the best tip I've got here is don't assume that people want to work from home. We have a lot of people who really don't want to work from home. I've got people in my team, for example, who, I mean, they've all worked from home because we've had to, but you know, they live with their parents and they've got a laptop on their bed. You know, from a kind of health and safety point of view, it's not great, and they don't necessarily want to be doing it. So I know I've got people in my team, some are really keen to just get back into the office, mainly the younger people, they just want to be back in. But some of the ones who are maybe a bit older, who've got kids, are going to really enjoy actually just maybe doing the school run every now and again. It means that, you know, we can go to the school assemblies if we need to. So I think it's important to talk to your staff about actually what do they want before you make decisions. We do have one client who is switching completely to 100% home working. They own a commercial office building at the moment and they're going to sell it. And that makes sense financially, but actually they haven't asked their team. They've just made the assumption, oh, everyone's going to love it, it's going to be great. And luckily it's a business that doesn't require massive collaboration. It's a very administrative, you know, functional business. But for a team like ours, we really have missed being in an office together. And it's not because, you know, we want to monitor, is everyone pulling their weight? It's about when you've got a case, you want to talk something through, you just want to be able to go, oh, can I bounce this off you? What do you think? That's so easy to do when you're in an office. It's possible with the tech that you can do it, but it's not as easy as just, like, oh, can I make a cup of tea? Can we have a chat about this quickly? So it's important to talk to people about actually what do they want. If you are going to have hybrid working, I would suggest that you don't make it, oh, work from where you want, whenever you want, however you want. Don't make it that loose, because you need to take account of that kind of collaborative working that just doesn't work necessarily as well when you're all working remotely. It's possible, but it's not necessarily as effective. Although there is the tech out there. So, and I'm sure that, God, Microsoft is going to come up with all sorts of things over and above Teams and the stuff that they've already done, so that this collaborative working's better. But I think that if you give people kind of too much freedom, sometimes they go, oh my God, I don't know what to do. I'm going to stay in the office 9 to 5 because this is too overwhelming for me. We've got too much freedom. So talk to people, have clear guidance, have clear rules about the expectations if people are working remotely, if, you know, making sure you keep your calendar up to date if people are working different hours. Salespeople are used to it, you know, they're out on the road, they're out of the office all the time, they keep the calendar up to date. From a safety point of view, that is absolutely critical. But when people are used to being in an office, they're just sitting in front of a computer, it can be so frustrating for colleagues when you can't get hold of somebody and it's between the 9 to 5 and they're supposed to be working, why aren't they? And that kind of culture, that negative culture can breed so fast. So having policies around what the expectations are when people are working away from the office is fine. I'll stop talking in a second, but just another example that I've got is I had a client who has always had people working from home. It's never been an issue, but they got really, really upset that this person had gone to visit their parents in Germany during the pandemic and they were working from Germany. Like, they couldn't possibly cope with the time difference. It was 1 hour, the time difference. And just the idea that someone was working in a different country and they hadn't got permission for that, and it's a holiday, and are they really working, or are they, you know, that whole kind of trust thing just dissipated overnight when they found out that somebody was, you know, was working in a different country. So having those policies and guidelines are really critical to making a real success of hybrid working, I think. I'll stop now.
I think, Tracey, you pull out a really important point there as well. I mean, it's the culture aspect of a business that needs to be maintained within the future of looking at hybrid or remote working. Because, you know, a lot of businesses, especially smaller kind of owner-managed SMEs, you know, they might have a great culture currently, and they've been able to communicate that effectively to their staff. You know, we are what we do, or how at least those policy and procedure documents that show people the steps that they take and get everyone's buy-in to help the business to grow. That's, you know, that aspect of it can almost get removed by having some element of your workforce who are working away, working maybe completely remotely, some of them are also always in the office, or other people who work around it. Being able to still continue on with building that culture and having those effective procedures in place to make sure that everyone knows the mission, how we're all getting there, how it all benefits everybody if we all succeed. That aspect's really, really important. I think you covered off that really, really great in terms of that team building exercises. You know, just having that element to it, getting everyone back on message, making sure everyone's motivated. It's just incredibly important. That's why I certainly see the future of work is going to go. It's more effort. I think it's more effort for a business to do that when everyone's not there, or potentially someone's on a screen and everyone else is in there. You want to make sure that everyone still feels part of a team, regardless of where they're working or how they're working.
Maybe this is a question, because it's interesting with this, because obviously we're preaching a little bit to the converse, like we all kind of get the fact that, you know, culturally it's about keeping employees happy, and therefore it leads to better productivity, etc., etc. I guess maybe a question that people might be asking is that what happens if I just work for someone who just doesn't get it? Like, what are my options if I have been basically said, well, you come in or you don't? Maybe not quite so crudely, but like, what would you suggest there? Jodie, did you want to come in? Or whoever, sorry.
My view on it is business case. If that individual is saying, right, I believe I can work effectively from home, and the employer is saying, no, we have to have you in. You know, the obvious route for the employee is, you know, they might think, well, I'm aggrieved here, I'm going to raise a grievance. It all kicks off. Everyone has to look into it. My view, and it used to be the case for like flexible working requests, you had to put in this kind of like quasi business case where you think, and that's kind of fallen out of favour. But I often advise it. You think, well, look, if you're telling your employer, this is how I'm productive, this is how I work well, these are the opportunities that the business is going to get from me because of that. Obviously, if it comes down to the point that it's like, nah, we just don't care, we don't give a monkey's what you say, we need you in, then yeah, you're not a good cultural fit for that business, which is a real shame. But the more that employee can think, well, actually, no, I am an asset to this workforce. This is how I perform well. This is what the business is going to benefit from having that. It means that the employer is more, I believe anyway, more likely to see that as a benefit to them. I think that's how I've liked to see it produced when I'm acting with employers. They suggest that to the employees and say, well, look, how can we work together? These are our aims. These are your aims. Where can we get to?
Anyone want to come up? Sorry, my eyes are darting around with the questions. Anyone else want to come in on that whilst I look for the next thing to have a look at? No? Okay. In terms of, we've had some questions around, actually the one about equipment. So we've had a couple of questions around, obviously when you're in the workplace, you can manage quite closely the types of equipment and the health and safety aspects of what they're doing in the office. It's a bit more difficult when it's at home. So again, what could you do to help with that? Because practically some people just don't have the space, which you've talked about before, and some people just don't have the equipment that they need at home, even though they're saying that they can work at home, but you don't think that that's the case.
We had a really interesting conversation with an employee close to the start of lockdown. They'd read an article in the Telegraph, which was basically like fancy work home setups, and they sent it to the director, to the MD, and said, "Oh, I don't have space to work from home. I don't have a decent desk. I don't really want to work on my dining room table. I don't want to take over my living room. I don't want to take over my bedroom. I'd really like." And it was talking about the tax advantages to business owners of having one of these like office pods in your garden. Could I please put 10 grand on expenses? No, you can't. And so we ended up saying to this employee, that's, you've got your own space at home. We're not going to be building you a separate office. We're not going to be investing. The employer panics. They were thinking, oh my God, I've got to pay for a desk. I've got to pay for a chair. I've got to pay for all of this stuff. They want an extra screen. Actually, what we said to the employee was, just come into the office and take anything you want. We'll get a van. We can ship the desk. We can ship the chair. We can ship all the equipment. So it's not about people using different equipment. They should use the equipment, laptops, IT, everything that's been supplied by the business. And you need that for data protection over and above everything else, rather than convenience. It doesn't necessarily mean that employers have got to double up on their spend. That's my point.
Yeah, I mean, you do have to go through, I mean, you should be doing the DSE assessments anyway, checking that, everybody's got the correct equipment at home. So even if they don't have, obviously lockdown was different in that we had to work from home and, some people didn't have a space. But, moving forward, if you are going to adopt a hybrid model and you are going to ask people and agree with people that they'll work from home, you should be making sure they've got the right equipment, and whether you take that from the office or you get something else for them, but making sure, especially things like chairs and laptop stands and mouse, really inexpensive equipment really, but it should be stuff that you're already paying for in the office. So I always think, I don't see it as a huge cost, but equally you need to make sure that it's not just everyone in the office has that, and then if people are working from home, they're expected to sit on their sofa. So making sure that if people are working from home, that you're doing a virtual DSE assessment, like a desk assessment, where we do it on video and just have a look at their desk, but then go through a series of questions and just make sure that you repeatedly do those to make sure that you can't see how they're working. So you've got to ask the questions and open that dialogue. I mean, we had a client where they did all of that, and then like 2 months later, everyone was like, oh, my wrists are really hurting. I really wish I had a laptop stand. And they were like, we did this assessment before. So again, it's just making sure that people are actually open about that, and maybe make some suggestions as well, and say, you know, have you got this? You know, I find sometimes employees don't really they might not understand why you're doing that. So it's really explaining to them what that process is, and why it's important that they have the right equipment, and actually what can you support them with, and what do they already have? Because some people already have stuff at home as well. You know, some of my staff and some of my clients were saying, you know, they had home offices already and things like that, whereas other people, as Tracey said, you know, they were working, you know, on a kitchen table with 3 housemates, and the noise was just too much. So it was about making sure that, you know, they had a separate space to come and work in the office if they needed to. But then when they were able to work from home, they still had the kit that they needed.
I'm just conscious we've got 6 minutes, but we can, people who are obviously around can feel free to stay on there, because we've got quite a lot of questions. Actually, on just quickly on the equipment, and this is an interesting one because actually it crossed my mind as well, where you've got, say for instance, half in, half out, half the week, let's say split in 2, what's your view around, because obviously you'll have equipment that you'll need in the office, but you don't really want to traipse all your equipment home every single time. Like, you've got a laptop, but like, if say we talked about screens earlier, if you had screens or you needed screens, what advice would you say about like the expectation for a company to double up, like having a set in the office and a set at home for you? Is that possible, or is that like unreasonable?
I don't think it's necessarily essential that they're doing that. I mean, the point of hybrid working is that, you know, you plan your time. If you've got tasks that you need to do where you need all that equipment, go into the office. Like, plan an admin day where you can just work from your laptop. You know, people just need to be grown-ups and plan their time. It doesn't mean that you've got to have a complete full office setup copied at home. And actually, do you really want all that junk sitting around your house? Sorry, I meant expensive company IT equipment. Do you really want that sitting around your house? Probably not. So, you know, have laptop, will travel, everything else, going to work. Is that too, have I simplified that too much?
No, that makes sense.
Like the essence of hybrid working, isn't it? Just to see what in a couple of words. But yeah, I completely agree. You know, someone might be saying to me, yeah, I want this, I need to have this to work from home. No, you don't. It depends exactly what you need to do the job well, and yeah, planning your time effectively, just the order of the day.
And just maybe a little bit away from the equipment, because we had a couple of questions on health and safety. Apart from equipment considerations, are there any other health and safety aspects that people should be thinking about when they are trying to get people to do the hybrid working?
So you still have health and safety obligations towards home working. Yeah, so risk assessments remain the same, provision of equipment remains the same, ensuring that they comply with health and safety policies and procedures, that all remains the same. There are elements that are passed over to the employees of the Health and Safety at Work Act in that specific scenario, but employers still need to be taking those reasonable steps. And as Jodie said, you know, doing the video consultations is the main part, providing surveys, ensuring that people have guides about how to work effectively, how to sit properly, how to use their screens properly. That's still a health and safety consideration regardless of where they're working.
There's also stress risk assessments are mandatory as well, so just considering things like that, you know, regardless of whether someone's at home or in the office. Anything, I suppose it's about treating everyone the same. It doesn't matter where they are. It's about making sure that everybody is treated in the same way and has the same support and the same access to everything that you would have in the office, you know. And actually that's a really important point, because often what happens is, or previously, someone would be working from home and they kind of get a bit left behind because, you know, everyone would be in the office and the infrastructure wasn't there. So this is an opportunity to create an infrastructure where everyone feels inclusive in the entire business, regardless of where they work or how they work or how many hours they work.
Well, I'm very conscious we've got 2 minutes. I apologise that there's still quite a lot of questions, but perhaps we'll just end it on the last question, which is question for all of your view. Do you think it's likely that COVID secure workplace obligations will still remain in place even if social restrictions ease on June the 21st? Who knows?
I'll just ask Boris. I have no idea. I think it's really difficult to say because, you know, we've been so up and down with all of the, you know, the fact that we had 3 lockdowns, who'd have thunk it, you know, but I think we are going in the right direction. But my gut feeling is if furlough is continuing till September, are there going to be some restrictions? Possibly. It's just so hard to say at this stage. I mean, obviously they're still saying that we're on the roadmap towards that goal, but it's really, really difficult. And even if we are lifting restrictions at that point, I think we still need to be mindful of the first slide that we talked about you know, managing overwhelm and mental health and all of that. So even if we do have all restrictions lifted, still listen to people's concerns and you know, manage that effectively.
Great. Any final comments before I'm going to have to wrap this up? I apologise to everyone's got questions still.
It's okay. I was just going to say, if there are any other questions, I'm happy for people to email those over, because I can see there's quite a few, and there was some for me personally, so I'm happy to give my email. I'll put it in the chat now if anyone wants to email me directly.
Brilliant. Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. Firstly, obviously, thank you very much to Tracey, Toby and Jodie for that session. Hopefully that was really helpful. It's quite nice actually, just to say, to have like a really interactive session. And Camille, I'm sure will follow up with all the participants. That please do give us our feedback on what you thought. And if you'd like another one, I'm sure we could organise another one. It's a bit of a plug, I guess, for just some of our upcoming webinars. There's a webpage on our website that has what is coming up. So do feel free to go and have a look at that and register for that. But otherwise, apart from that, thank you again for all your little insights. We will be doing a follow-up around this anyway. We've got a recording and we will send that out to everyone else. And obviously, if you've got any other subsequent questions, we've got the contact details of the guys who are on the webinar. But apart from that, I will wish you all a very good day. Hopefully enjoy the sunshine if it's sunny where you are. And I'll get Camille to round that up. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks again.
Bye.
Bye.